Hello, I'm Dr. Tiwari from Government College, Sri Ganganagar. Today we are going to read the poem Because I Could Not Stop for Death, written by the famous American poetess Emily Dickinson. Like all her poems, it's also a very small poem running just into 24 lines. Let's read the poem first. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carries held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill. For only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We passed before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, it's centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. So this is the poem. As you know, it is one of the most interesting and most intriguing and most touching poems of Emily Dickinson. This poem leaves an indelible mark on the reader's mind. The poem deals with Miss Dickinson's favorite subject, the effect of death upon a human being. Instead of the human fear or religious awe usually associated with death, in this poem, death is portrayed as a restful trip, a pleasant journey with a courteous visitor and an unnoticed third traveler, immortality. Yet, one perceives undercurrents of terror and shock, especially in the last three stanzas, as the passenger gradually becomes aware of the utter finality of the trip. The tensions inherent in this ambivalent approach to death depend heavily on the domestic imagery and the casual tone. We are startled to hear awful death addressed as a kindly gentleman whose gracious manner soothes the victim and whose invitation is gladly accepted as from an old family friend or lover. In fact, the erotic undertones barely hinted at in the opening and later intensified by the bridal gown imagery explore another facet in death's complex personality. The literal description of death contains no real terror, as a tone of easy familiarity and charm continues throughout the poem. The first stanza describes the narrator as so engrossed in household activities that she cannot spare time for death's call. As she says, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carries held but just ourselves and immortality. Only his kindness and consideration compel her to snatch a few minutes for a short ride. Her reluctance hides the harsh reality that she has no choice, that her carriage is a hearse, and that the lover's outing is a somber journey to the grave. Even immortality's presence, openly hinting at the soul's departure from the body, and the longer pilgrimage into eternity is barely acknowledged and quickly forgotten. This idea of a casual trip is expanded in the second stanza with the key phrase, my labor and my leisure. For death actually heightens one's perception of time. The precious, fleeting qualities of life, its mystery of work and joy are now freshly appreciated. One regrets the loss of pleasures while being glad to forfeit life's terrible pressures and fears. With the reiteration of past in the third stanza and the increasing awareness of time, the slow journey begins to hasten. As she says, we passed the school where children strove. As the corpse is physically carried through the town to the outlying fields, the soul finally crosses through the barriers of temporal time and the mind reviews its past life, childhood, schooling, the ripeness of maturity, and finally the darkening red of evening age. The physical and spiritual implications of we past are intensified by the gazing grain image, which both mocks and parallels the inert corpse. The rich grain gazes indifferently, almost hostilely. There can be no such equivalent death in nature, only a laying fallow after the harvest, followed by an eventual spring rebirth. The fourth stanza marks a definite transition from the accelerating tone of the country outing. Even the metrical shift from a 4-stress to a 3-stress line technically indicates a new mood. The poetess corrects her earlier statement about passing the sun, for nature controls, not man. With increasing darkness comes a dampness and chill. Now the poetess is frighteningly aware of how inadequate her preparations for the journey have been. The sheer wedding gown offers no protection from the cold, which indicates how completely her sophisticated visitor has deceived her with his assurances of a warm and friendly trip. Still, death has further surprises for his alarmed companion. Her bridal chamber is a horrifying combination of an actual mansion and the swelling mound of a graveyard tomb. As she says, we paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Here the terror is achieved without any morbid description of mouldering bones and worms so frequently used by Edgar Allan Poe. The bond between life and death is scarcely visible as the poetess finally perceives her destination. With the end of the journey, death departs and the poetess reviews the trip from the vantage point of eternity. As she says, since then it is centuries and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. This sudden change from present reality to the new dimension of limitless time shows how completely death breaks all connections with life. This surprising shift jars the reader after the beguiling leisureliness of the journey, while the final image of the horses' heads turned toward eternity magnificently conveys the awful power and impervious majesty of death. The poem skillfully handles the effect of death's unexpected visit upon the victim, weaving her progression from flustered self-pleasure and comfortable anticipation to gradual fear and doubt into a full realization of death's deception and terrifying purpose. Death is seen in the poem from various angles as a welcome relief from life's tensions, as a force which heightens one's satisfaction with life, as a lover gently conveying one to hidden pleasures, as a cynical caller who poses beneath the cordial exterior, and finally as a solemn guide leading one to the threshold of immortality. In this poem, Miss Dickinson's profound views of death and immortality are rendered with an artistic perfection. Thank you.